gives a fuck about an Oxford comma? By Great 78.
Who gives a fuck about an Oxford comma? I've seen those English dramas too. They're cruel. So if there's any other way to spell the word, it's fine with me. With me.
Chapter 21. Buddy Holly. Sunday, October 31st, 1999. Oxford, England. Theo. Closing the bedroom door behind himself, Theo dropped his head back against the door, a swirl of thoughts in his mind. He hardly noticed the two women cuddled together in bed, as he was still preoccupied by the conversation he'd had with Draco just now. Thus far in his university career, Theo found attending Oxford to be utterly delightful. A bit of academia, some decent grub, and a willing and enticing assemblage of top-notch fanny. He knew Draco had been having a rough go of it at university, but he felt a lot of this was brought on by the blonde wizard himself. After all, who falls in love right before heading to university? In Theo's mind, that was like bringing sand to the beach. It was true, Theo had given the man a few helpful suggestions for wooing Hermione, some good, and some questionable, perhaps. In his defense, Theo had no idea how well Draco would take to the idea of becoming the world's biggest knob when it came to cleaning. Theo had to hand it to the wizard. Draco was committed to the bit. Why, then, had Draco decided to clean the common room this morning? It had still been a fright when Theo discovered Cora hovering over his mate last night, ready to fuck him instead of joining in the fun in Theo's room. Yet now it was nearly pristine. What changed? Theo sighed. Draco was getting harder and harder to predict these days. This summer he'd announced that he was gobsmacked over Hermione Granger. Now the complete bell-end was pissing around on the telephone, making plans with other women. Theo shook his head in exasperation. None of it made any sense. But the biggest mystery was why Shacklebolt kept showing up to talk with Draco. The other wizard wasn't revealing anything, but Theo wasn't stupid. The Minister for Magic wasn't one to appear at the ungodly hour of 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning for a social call on a former enemy. Theo wasn't certain what was going on, but it involved Hermione somehow. And Kingsley Shacklebolt was pulling the puppet strings. It was an all too familiar circumstance for Theo, one he definitely did not like. There was a stir of bedcovers on the bed in front of him. "Theo, I thought you were going to make us breakfast," Laura asked in a petulant tone, blinking at him blearily. "All you brought back was a glass of water." He looked down to find the half-empty glass of water in his hand, just as Laura had said. "Oh, sorry, my love, I was talking with my flatmate, and I got distracted." "Was he the one dressed like Lestat last night? He's fit," Laura mused. "Yes, but as I told Cora, he's a horrible fuck. Barely worth the effort, or so I'm told." At these words, there was a muffled crashing sound from the sitting room, as what sounded like several cans and bottles were tipped onto the floor. So much for cleanliness, Theo mused. Cora lifted her head from a deep sleep and looked at the two of them groggily. "What's that? Where am I?" "You're on my bed. That was nothing. Darling, get some more rest," Theo said. Cora did not need much coaxing, and dropped her head back to the pillow, asleep once more, almost instantly. "If you don't have anything for breakfast, let's go somewhere. I'm starving. The Great Hall should be open." Laura wheedled. There was a loud crack from the sitting room. Theo recognized the sound of apparition, but it caused Laura to bolt upright. "What was that? Did he break something?" I think it was the door. He's probably gone," Theo answered. Listen, I need to talk to my other flatmate. But I don't think she's here. She's probably coming back soon, though. Can you just wait a little while, and then I'll take you and Cora to breakfast? Laura gave a reluctant smile, lifting one knowing eyebrow. I suppose so. But what are we going to do in the meantime? Theo offered a conspiratorial grin of his own. I've got a fun idea. The question is, how quiet can you be? Let's let Cora sleep, all right, love? He approached the foot of the bed, climbing up carefully between her legs and pulling down the sheet to reveal her naked form. He kissed up one thigh, gripping her knees to pull her legs apart and make room for himself. In a matter of a minute, Theo's lips lightly sucked and nibbled at her cunt, offering the best distraction for her hunger. Laura held a pillow to her mouth in her efforts to maintain her silence. Awakened by their movements, however, Cora cracked one eye to watch them lying next to her, lost in their own pleasure. She smiled to herself, aroused. Her fingers drifted between her own legs to coax a bit of self-gratification, whilst patiently waiting her turn. She did not know where this man had learned to pleasure a woman this way, and she didn't especially care. But there was no other word for it besides magical. Draco waited impatiently as he sat on the closest toilet lid inside the locked out-of-order stall of the Oxford bus station loo. His heel bobbed a rapid tattoo on the sticky floor. Arms crossed, his left fingers drummed rhythmically on his right bicep. Thankfully, the stall was not large enough for him to pace within it, or he would have. Potter was late. He checked his watch. 35 minutes he'd been waiting. He'd asked the sodding Gryffindor to come immediately. What could be so important that would keep him? After another minute, he thought about giving pacing a shot anyway. Just as he was about to stand, 2 quick cracks broke the stillness of the stale air in the grimy lavatory. Potter appeared with one foot standing on the toilet lid, between Draco's parted thighs. His dragonhide boot tip was a mere fraction of an inch away from crushing Draco's bollocks. The other foot hovered in mid-air, searching for purchase on anything around it, as the chosen one struggled to stay upright. A second later, Potter's hovering foot found one of Draco's thighs, coming down hard on the Slytherin's quadricep. "Oi, what the fuck, Potter?" Draco cried, pushing at the man's legs and feet. "Get off!" Unfortunately for both of them, immediately behind Potter stood a Weasley, identifiable by his bright red hair, his lack of fashion sense, and the apoplectic rage that threatened to devour his face whole. "What the fuck is Malfoy doing here, Harry?" "I thought you said we were meeting about something important." "Budge up, Ron," Harry practically yelled as Draco pushed at his feet. I don't have space to move." "Unlock the stall and get out, Weasley," Draco called to the ungainly Ginger, who stood so near and yet so far away. "I can't! Harry's on my ankle!" "Potter, step that way." "You step that way, Malfoy. Your arm is cutting off my windpipe." Draco somehow managed to stand and stumble backwards onto the toilet lid, and then clamber onto the toilet paper holder, clinging to the top of the stall wall. He yanked his wand free from his pocket and wheezed, "Hello, Amora." The door sprang open, expelling the 2 twisted Gryffindors, who fell in a tangle onto the filthy floor of the bus station public washroom. In an angry huff, they both stared up at Draco, who still balanced on the toilet paper holder, staring down in disbelief at the pair. Ron lifted the elbow of the silver tracksuit jacket, not unlike the one that Draco had banished only days ago. The jacket sleeve clung to the tacky floor for only a moment, before Weasley managed to peel it away from the adhesive ground, bringing up a bit of mucky filth with it. He was the first to find his voice. "Harry, as soon as we get off of this disgusting floor, I'm going to need you to explain to me exactly why we're here, meeting Draco Malfoy." Beside him, the scar-faced wizard gave a humourless laugh and jerked his head at Draco. "If you think this place is disgusting, you should see this Git's flat." Hermione. Between the brief torrential morning rain and the mystery of Jason's parentage, she barely paid attention to her surroundings on her walk back from Jason's house. Once outside the door of the flat in Peckwater, Hermione paused for a deep, fortifying breath. Things last night between herself, Jason, and Draco had not gone well. She did not know what was going on with the wizard, but something was amiss, and she hoped that they could talk it out in the light of day now. But inside she found herself alone in the sitting-room, which somehow looked far worse than it had when she'd left with Jason an hour before. Apropos of nothing, the room had gone from messy to downright filthy in that time, and she had no idea what had predicated the change. She closed the front door behind her, her mind struggling to make sense of the chaotic shamble in front of her as she applied drying charms to her wet clothes. "Drake, are you back?" Theo asked as he opened his own bedroom door, his hair delightfully mussed with either sleep or sex, or both. Spotting Hermione, he said, "Oh, good, it's you." Hermione tilted her head at him, offering him a worried frown. "Theo, hi. Did you speak to Draco this morning? Is there something the matter with him? Is he all right?" Theo turned back to his room, giving a reassuring wave to whomever he'd left in his bed. He pulled the door closed behind him, then tugged his silk robe ties tighter around his waist. With his pocketed wand he cast a muffliato. To Hermione he said quietly, "I don't know, love. Draco has gotten himself mixed up in something. I don't know exactly what it is, but it doesn't sound good. Remember when I told you he was meeting unexpectedly with people?" Hermione's brow lifted of its own accord. "You mean Amelia?" Theo threw her a perplexed look. "Amelia? What does she... Wait, do you mean that muggle bird from class? The tall one?" She suppressed a sigh and said reproachfully, "Yes, Theo, they've been dating for at least a few weeks." "Are we talking about Draco? Draco Malfoy, that lives here?" "Yes, of course. Who else would we be discussing?" You're right. Sorry. My brain, it's done a bunk this morning, love. Don't mind me. Say, if you were going to get in touch with Harry Potter, how would you do it?" Now, Hermione was the one flummoxed. "You want to get in touch with Harry?" Right, I just had a few questions I wanted to ask him, is all," Theo replied with an easy smile. "Well, I suppose you could write to him," she offered, crossing to the desk against the wall. She started to pick through the top layer of mess, but stopped almost immediately, after finding a bowl of mouldy porridge spilt over the lot. Bloody hell, how is Draco living like this? How can he find this acceptable? This is no way to live. Instead, she conjured a clean bit of paper and summoned a muggle pen to write down Harry's address. Theo gave her an uncomfortable smile, taking the piece of paper from her fingers without meeting her eyes. "Yes, I can't for the life of me imagine what this is all about. Thanks for the info, Hermione. I should get back to the girls." Hermione grimaced and nodded, crossing to her own bedroom. She really did need to spend a bit of time on her partner assignment, as well as revision for the rest of her classes. She had a lot to be getting on with, and spending time dwelling on either Theo's orgies or what was wrong with Draco Malfoy wasn't helping in the slightest. Theo. "Ladies, give me a few minutes to shower, and we'll go find some breakfast, yeah?" Theo asked, turning back to the pair of vixens in his bed after talking with Hermione. Laura and Cora, who'd been whispering to themselves, nodded and smiled at him as he left. I haven't met the other flatmate, the girl, have you? Laura mused to her friend once they were alone. Wonder what she's like. I've seen her in classes. She's quite pretty, but she seems like a bit of a brain box. The other one, though, the blonde, God, he's fucking fit, Cora said as Laura nodded. I don't care if Theo does say he's shit in bed. He looks like a fucking Greek god. Too right, Laura chuckled as she pulled on her bra from the night before. Pass me that top, will you? Cora did so, then began searching around for her own clothes. Theo's kind of an odd one, isn't he? Laura laughed, leaning over the side of the bed to grope around on the floor for her bottoms. He can be as odd as he wants to be, so long as his tongue can do that. I swear, it's like magic. Both girls giggled, each now mostly dressed in the teensy cozies that they had worn the night before. Cora frowned. I don't see my knickers, and I can only find one shoe. I've got them here, love. You left them in the lav. Theo returned from his shower, wrapped in a towel, and holding one black stiletto, her ripped stockings, and a pair of knickers. Stockings discarded, Cora finished dressing quickly, and in a matter of minutes they were crossing Tom Quad on their way to breakfast, the girls each wearing a pair of Theo's cinched trousers, and their own coats over their cozies. Isn't that your flatmate, Lestat? I don't recognize the others. They go to university here? Laura asked, tipping her head towards a trio of men, walking the perimeter of the quad, deep in conversation. Theo stared at the three of them for a long moment before answering. That's him. And all of this just keeps getting weirder and weirder. The girls giggled again, pulling him towards the great hall and breakfast. Theo checked over his shoulder one last time to confirm what he'd seen. Yes, from the looks of it, he very much needed to get in touch with Harry Potter. Draco. Potter, please explain to me what Weasley is doing here. Draco ground out as the three of them exited the bus station, each casting a subtle repelling charm to avoid getting soaked by the rain. The 2/3 of the golden trio that had picked themselves up off of the dirty bus station washroom floor had scourgified their clothing as best they could. Draco looked around nervously, scanning the square outside the bus station. He had no idea where Granger was at this moment, but she'd not been in the flat when he left about 40 minutes before. If she came across him palling around with Scarface and the Weasel, she'd know something was amiss, and Granger wasn't one to let things go easily. Weasley currently looked to be in his usual mood, sour, sullen, and ready to scrap with anyone. I'm asking myself the same question, Git. Potter sighed, lifting his arm and twisting it in a way that was familiar to the other two wizards, even as it likely looked odd to any muggle paying a bit of mind to him. The heavy blanket sensation of a muffliato charm fell around the three. Ron, I told you I thought there was a problem with Hermione. We're here to talk about it. Weasley scoffed angrily. I'm willing to bet that this Git is the cause of those problems, am I right? Draco clenched his jaw, mostly annoyed that the Weasel wasn't so very far off from the truth. Draco might not have been the start of the problems, but he'd certainly played his part in them. What have you told him? He asked Potter now. Next to nothing, Weasley spat out, cutting his eyes to the other two. The two of you better start talking now, or I'm going back to that disgusting bus station pisser, and I'm going home. Fine. Malfoy thinks that Shacklebolt is trying to push Hermione out of the wizarding world. He thinks she's too popular, and that she's a threat to his continuing as Minister for Magic. That's mental, the ginger prat began, then stopped and thought about Potter's words. It was a feat that likely took every bit of his concentration, Draco was certain. Do you think that's true? Potter shook his head. I don't know. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have said no, never. But a couple of months ago, I overheard Robards telling Mason to bring him a copy of the Longbottom report. And of course that got my attention. I mean, I only know of one Longbottom family. Then Mason let slip a bit that the minister's office was the ones who wanted to see it. Draco frowned, an expression mirrored by Weasley. Why would anyone want to look into any of the Longbottoms? Potter answered, no idea. So I asked Mason the next day what the Longbottom investigation was about. Draco raised a critical eyebrow. Was that such a good idea? What if it gets back to Robards that you're asking? Luckily, critical thinking isn't Mason's strong suit, so I think the secret's safe. He's the second assistant to Robards' deputy, and he was probably more focused on what he was going to have for lunch that day than anything I was asking him about. Potter supplied. So what did he say? Weasley asked the question on Draco's mind as well. He said his boss, Davies, had been asked to check in on Neville, to see what his plans were for the future. You know he's doing that internship in Amsterdam at that horticulturing university, Wageningen, or something like that. The Weasel looked confused. Right, so what's the big deal? Draco narrowed his eyes. The big deal, Weasley, is that Longbottom came out of the Wizarding War with nearly as big a hero reputation as Potter here. The minister's worried about Longbottom's popularity, same as Granger's. Weasley wrinkled his nose in disbelief. Why would that matter to the minister? Draco sniffed disdainfully. Shacklebolt's not worried that Longbottom's going to start growing venomous tentacula and selling it on the black market. He's worried about Longbottom capitalizing on his popularity and making a run for minister, just like he is about Granger. Weasley scoffed. Neville isn't interested in being Minister for Magic. Besides, if Kingsley's worried about Hermione challenging him, why isn't he worried about Harry, or me, for that matter? It was Potter who answered him. I told him a long time ago that I would never want to be Minister for Magic. That sounds like hell on earth, if I'm being honest. Nothing but politicking and glad-handing, coming up with policy and putting out proverbial fires all day. No thank you. Draco slid his eyes to meet the scar-headed wizard, and they both silently agreed to not address why Shacklebolt wasn't as interested in Weasley's future plans as he had been in the others. Draco had no doubt that Granger was largely responsible for the OWLs that Weasley had earned. He felt sure that the wizard's current successes in life were due to his status as best friend with the boy who lived. Despite Draco's personal distaste for the man, there was nothing inherently wrong with him, he knew. There was nothing particularly remarkable about Weasley either, however. So, Shacklebolt thinks that Hermione's trying to become Minister for Magic. Could she even do that? Isn't there some sort of age limit? Weasley asked uncertainly. Not stated anywhere in the legal statutes, Draco said, and besides, Shacklebolt is serving out Scrimmage's term. There's still probably 5 or 6 years before he would be up for re-election. She might not be ready to campaign by then, but certainly the election after that. If Granger played her cards right, she could be minister in 15 years. Even less if she wanted. Weasley narrowed his eyes at Draco. I bet you'd be having kittens then, wouldn't you, Malfoy? A Muggleborn in charge of our world. Maybe that's what this is all really about. Tell the truth, is this just some big ploy of yours to bring down both the minister and Hermione? Draco rolled his eyes. Weasley, I have 0 fucks to give about who the Minister for Magic is now, or will be in the future. Before this past winter, when he asked me to keep tabs on Granger, and to keep her occupied, I have not exchanged more than 10 words with Kingsley Shacklebolt. If I'd had my druthers, I still wouldn't have. What the fuck does that even mean, then? Keep her occupied? Are you telling me that Kingsley asked you to get close to Hermione? Is that why you insisted on living with her, buying her things? Weasley's face, which had settled on a spotty pink over the last several minutes, was back to Gryffindor red in an instant. He pushed past Potter to confront Draco, standing toe-to-toe with him. He breathed the stale smell of burnt sausage into the former Slytherin's face. Draco's fists came out of his trouser pockets as his jaw clenched. His hardened gaze stared down his nose at Weasley, even though the red-haired man was nearly his height. "Ron, mate, step off," Potter muttered, looking around to reassure passers-by that everything was all right. When the ginger asshole did not move, the other wizard placed a calming hand on his friend's shoulder. "Hermione is a big girl, and she can take care of herself. She doesn't need you fighting her battles, and she can make her own decisions about how she occupies her time, and with whom she occupies it." Weasley looked ready to spit in his face, and Draco nearly wished he'd do it, just to have an excuse to pummel the shit out of this man. This tosser had ignored his witch, snogged other women when he was supposedly dating Granger, left her at school for Christmas when her own parents had abandoned her, and now he thought he had any right to her. The weasel huffed angrily one more time, then stepped back. Draco stepped towards him to silently make his point. "Malfoy," Potter said quietly. Draco realized that it was he now who was acting as the aggressor. He sighed deeply and relaxed his shoulders and fists, moving away from the ginger wizard. "Sorry," Draco muttered under his breath. Weasley only grunted, and the three of them backed away from each other, no one willing to meet the other's eyes. If Weasley or Potter knew the full extent of what Shacklebolt had actually proposed, that he marry Granger as a way to silence her, one or the pair of them might actually pop their clogs, and they would probably try to take Draco with them as they went, he thought ruefully. When the three of them were done here, Draco was going to need a stiff drink. After a brief bit of uncomfortable silence, the three men resumed walking. They talked through ideas. They discussed possibilities. They brought up potential pitfalls. They argued angrily. They bought coffees at a corner shop and argued some more. And after several hours of debate, they had something that resembled a plan. Hermione. By Sunday evening, her eyes were nearly crossed with exhaustion, having revised in her room all day. As expected, Amelia had not called to set up a time to work on their partnership project, so Hermione worked alone on it. She dressed for the formal dinner seating, uncertain if Jason would be meeting her. They had eaten together more evenings than not recently, and it had become a bit of a routine for the pair of them. Now she wondered if there had been something more to their relationship all along. Jason had never acknowledged the existence of magic to her, yet if Miranda Perkins was a witch, and Jason was her son, certainly he knew about it, even if he wasn't magical himself. She wasn't sure why the man had never brought it up with her, but perhaps Advisor Perkins also dealt with Muggle students. Perhaps he didn't know that Hermione was a witch. And putting all of that aside, why had Jason never made a move on her? Notwithstanding the out-of-the-blue offer of sex this morning, he had been extraordinarily polite with her. Hermione had practically thrown herself at him in the library last week, and the man ignored it entirely. Every time they kissed, it was a chaste peck on the lips or the forehead. Were they in a relationship? Dating? Only friends? Hermione truly had no idea, and if she were being entirely honest with herself, she did not particularly care. The presence of Draco in her life left little room for romantic interest in anyone else. Maybe she should just cut Jason loose, rather than string him along. A few minutes later, in the great hall, however, she pushed these thoughts aside for later. Jason greeted her with a huge smile and a soft kiss on the cheek before they sat to eat. Across the large room, Draco sat by himself, moody as he shoved food around on his plate. After a few minutes, he stood, dropping his napkin to the table and striding out of the great hall. Had Amelia stood him up? Hermione wondered. Now that she thought of it, she'd never actually seen the two of them eating together in the great hall. How odd.
Shame that the Undie is closed tonight. I fancy a pint,
Jason mused after dinner as they left the great hall. Well, you could come up, Hermione offered half-heartedly, gesturing to the Peckwater building across the quad.
Will your flatmate be there? The one that called you...
I think his words just came out funny because he hit his mouth when he fell, Jason. I don't think he was calling me anything, she said, reassuring him quickly.
Jason looked mildly thunderous. Still, I don't see how it's any of his business what you do and who you do it with.
Hermione gave a sad smile at these words. It was true. She supposed it wasn't Draco's business at all. She answered, In answer to your question, yes, he's probably there. I saw him in the great hall. He left soon after we arrived.
Then I'll just say good night here,
Jason said, turning to face her.
See you in class tomorrow.
She nodded in reply, and leaned in for a kiss, unsurprised when Jason's lips landed just a bit to the side of her own. Good night. Upstairs in flat 307, she found Draco in the sitting room, enjoying a scotch and reading from a thick textbook. Draco, hi, she said nervously, trying to school the note of nervousness in her own voice. He looked up at her with that familiar old expression, the one he'd often worn at Hogwarts during their 8th year. She remembered thinking in their early days of living together that he often seemed angry at her interruption. Now she realized that it wasn't anger, but something much stronger. If she didn't know better, she would say that it looked almost like possessiveness, perhaps even hunger. She had a hard time naming whatever the expression was, but it made the backs of her legs tingle with a frisson of magic. She took a deep, calming breath, forcing down the flare of heat his look caused in her lower belly. Can we talk about last night? She asked, forcing her voice into a light tone. Just as quickly as Draco's eyes smouldered with heat, they turned blank and neutral.
Nothing to talk about, Hermione. I trust you had a good night, the wizard asked woodenly.
He'd called her Hermione. She gave him a weak smile, crossing to the kitchenette and snapping on the electric kettle. Would you have some tea?
Are you?
Hermione gave a small laugh. Not R. U is right, but V comes next.
Why?
Draco asked softly, and from the brush of fabric against her legs and his Scotch-scented breath on her neck, she sensed that he was now standing right behind her. She turned. He loomed over her, crowding her space, staring down at her with that burning heat in his silver eyes again. She felt her breath stutter in her lungs. Why, what? She whispered. Draco's voice nearly broke as he asked,
Why did you bring him here last night? Why did you let him stay?
Up close, he smelled of cedar and sandalwood and Scotch. She saw now that his eyes were bloodshot. Either he'd not slept well last night, or he'd been drinking most of the evening, or both. How much have you had to drink? She asked.
Too much. Not enough,
he answered, leaning closer towards her. Up close, she could see the dark blonde stubble on his chin and the steady thrum of his pulse in his neck. She took a slow, deep breath, her chest rising with the effort. He was so close that her open formal robes brushed his chest through his jumper. Draco, she said slowly. Was it a warning? An invitation? She had no idea. She only knew that he was standing far too close to her, and that she did not want him to move away. His nose brushed her temple now, and he took a deep breath of his own, filling his lungs as though he could not get enough air. His chest rose against hers once more.
Granger, She tilted her head up, knowing even as she did so that it wasn't the wisest choice. She was dating someone else. He was as well. But the crashing swell of her pounding heartbeat flooded her body, drowning out the reluctant voice in her head that wondered if this was a good idea. One of his hands came up as though to touch her cheek. Then it dropped to the counter behind her. His other hand pinned her in on the other side, confining her between his arms. The memory of that night in the corridor at Hogwarts sprang into her mind. New Year's Eve, almost a year ago. His arms had caged her against the wall, and she had moved away at the last minute. No, it wasn't a good idea, but she damned well wasn't going to pull away this time. "Granger, Draco said, his tongue flicking out of his mouth to wet his lips. Then he was lowering his face to hers, and she felt her body relax, almost melt, as he leaned into her, brushing their lips softly against each other. His mouth was warm and bittersweet with scotch, searching. The current of magic that coursed between them flooded her body and made her spine tingle. For a moment she felt as though she was floating, weightless against him. Her hands came up to his hips to ground herself, pulling him closer against her body, sighing in blessed relief, even as a vague unease threatened to yank her back down to earth, uncertain if this was a good idea. Then her lips parted. His tongue brushed feather-light against her own, and she found that she did not give a single fuck if this was a good idea or not. The magic she felt when their lips met seemed to multiply, to expand, from her core to her fingertips and toes, an energy that could not be contained. Draco's head tipped to the side, and hers matched the movement, each deepening the kiss. She felt hungry for him. For her, this kiss had been a long time coming, and something about the urgency of his kiss made her think that he felt the same. His tongue was both insistent and yielding against hers, and where they were pressed together at the hips, Hermione felt her body stir delightfully, a warmth spreading throughout her core. Her hands made their way up to his sides, under his jumper, caressing the muscles of his back through the finely woven fabric of the Oxford shirt he wore. Godric, he was fit, she thought, for easily the 100th time in the last week alone. The only difference was, this time she had empirical, tactile evidence, and she was loving every second of exploring him. She moaned, and Draco did the same, the timbre of his voice vibrating against her mouth exquisitely. His hand that had been on the counter found the small of her back and squeezed gently, even as his other hand came up to her hair. He ran his fingers lightly down her curls, cupping her neck as he leaned into her, deepening their kiss. She could feel the hard line of his cock pressed against her belly, and her body ached for release. One of his hands began travelling from her curls to the front of her open robes to her breasts, his fingers cupping gently around her in a way that made her body hum for more. "Oh, gee!" A familiar voice broke the spell that had been cast over them both, and Draco sprang back as though burned, even as Hermione spun back towards the counter to catch her breath and hide her blushing cheeks. Theo stood at the entrance of his bedroom, his eyes pinging back and forth between the pair of them. "You win the alphabet game, Theo." "Oh, gee, indeed," Hermione said in a breathless voice, staring at the whistling kettle on the counter in front of her, as though seeing it for the first time. She flicked the little device off hurriedly before it scorched, no longer in the mood for tea. I really need to study. We'll talk later, yes?" Her eyes flicked up to Draco's, then back down at the floor. He nodded shortly, stepping back to allow her plenty of room to exit the kitchenette. Shutting her bedroom door quickly behind her, she turned to face her room, dropping back with a thud to lightly bang her head on the door behind her. She had two emotions, crashing and cascading throughout her body. One was panic. The other was overwhelming, effusive, barely restrained joy.
Who gives a fuck about an Oxford comma? I seen those English dramas too. They're cruel.
Thank you for listening to Who Gives a Fuck About an Oxford Comma by Great78. If you enjoyed the story and would like to listen to more, please follow me on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts by searching for Silver and Copper. Or you can find me under Great78 on Archive of Our Own.
I